Have you ever watched someone you love dismiss the very foundation of who you are, and in that moment, feel the ground shift beneath your feet? It wasn't a scream or a fight that ended things between Vanessa and me. It was a quiet unraveling, starting with a single sentence that cut deeper than any argument could. I'm Alex, a guy raised in a home where laughter echoed off the walls and success was measured in lives saved, not dollars earned. My family, firefighters, nurses, teachers, built their world on hard work and open hearts, and I thought Vanessa, with her sharp ambition and polished smile, could fit into that somehow. But as we drove away from my parents' 40th anniversary party, her words hung in the air like smoke. I just can't be part of a family like yours. That confession didn't just sting. It revealed a chasm I hadn't fully seen. One that would lead to heartbreak, rediscovery, and a twist of fate involving a hidden fortune she never suspected. Right now, as I picture her forced politeness amid the chaos of homemade lasagna and booming stories, the tension builds like a storm on the horizon, promising complications that would redefine everything. She told me, "I just can't be part of a family like yours. They're not the type of people we belong with." I didn't argue. I only said, "I get it." She figured out who our people really were when I ran away and married a woman who truly appreciated where I came from. And when my parents changed their will, leaving everything in the trust fund that my ex never even knew existed to my wife. The first time my fiancée, Vanessa, met my whole family was the exact moment I realized deep down that I could never walk down the aisle with her. It wasn't a huge scene or one shocking thing. It was a bunch of tiny moments, quiet little signs of her looking down on them, all leading up to one blunt, cutting sentence. It happened during my parents' 40th wedding party. My family isn't hard to understand. My dad used to be a fire chief, a man who ran into flames while others ran out. My mom worked as an ER nurse for 3 decades. My aunts and uncles are skilled workers, teachers, small shop owners. They're loud, they laugh big, they hug tightly, and their homes smell like homemade food with overlapping voices telling stories. They are, simply put, genuine. I always thought that was their strongest quality. Vanessa didn't see it that way. She lived life like she was always updating her perfect online profile. She was striking, driven, and walked through life with a polished air that I once mistook for depth. She cared deeply about making the right connections, being around people who looked impressive, and putting together a life that seemed perfect from the outside. I used to believe that her drive would match well with my more down-to-earth side. Now, I see she treated my background like an outdated apartment, something she'd fix up later into something more acceptable. The celebration was at my parents' cozy, familiar house, the one I was raised in. Knowing how important she was to me, my family pulled out all the stops. Mom cooked her well-known lasagna. Dad, usually quiet, tried bonding with her by showing off his prized antique fire helmets. My cousins welcomed her into their noisy card game. Vanessa was excellent at being friendly on the surface. She smiled, she nodded, she said the right words, but I was watching closely. I noticed how her smile never quite made it to her eyes, how she slightly curled her nose when my uncle told a mildly inappropriate joke, how she discreetly wiped her hand on a napkin after my aunt's hug, how she kept checking her phone under the table every few minutes. Her face was a mask of forced politeness. She looked at my family like a scientist studying a culture she had no interest in joining. As the evening wore on, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, a mix of embarrassment and protectiveness that I hadn't anticipated. My sister pulled me aside at one point, whispering with a raised eyebrow, "She's nice, but does she ever relax?" I brushed it off with a laugh, but inside, doubts were creeping in like shadows at dusk. Vanessa had always talked about our future in terms of upscale dinners and networking events. But here, surrounded by the raw energy of my relatives, sharing tales of late-night shifts and community barbecues, she seemed out of place, like a porcelain doll in a room full of sturdy wooden toys. I remembered the first time I brought her to meet just my parents. She'd complimented the house politely, but later suggested we could help them upgrade someday. Back then, I thought it was thoughtful. Now, amid the clatter of plates and the scent of garlic bread fresh from the oven, it felt like a warning I had ignored. The party itself was a whirlwind of familiar chaos. Kids ran underfoot, chasing each other with squeals that blended it into the adults' booming conversations about old fires Dad had fought or the patient's mom had patched up in the ER. Uncle Mike, with his calloused hands from years in construction, slapped me on the back and joked about how Vanessa's fancy job in marketing must make her too busy for real work. She laughed it off, but I saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes, the way she smoothed her dress as if to remind herself of her own status. My cousins, a rowdy bunch who owned a local auto shop, tried to draw her into a game of poker, explaining the rules with exaggerated patience. She played a hand or two, but her glances at the clock told me she was counting down the minutes. It was in these small interactions that the divide became clear, not just between her and them, but between what she valued and what I had always held dear. By the time dessert was served, Mom's famous apple pie, warm and oozing cinnamon, I was hyper-aware of every nuance. Vanessa picked at her slice, commenting on how quaint it was to have everything homemade, as if it were a novelty rather than a tradition. My dad, sensing the awkwardness perhaps, shared a story from his firefighting days about pulling a family from a burning apartment and the gratitude that followed. The room fell into appreciative silence, but Vanessa's response was a bland, "That's inspiring," delivered while scrolling discreetly on her phone again. In that instant, I felt a pang of isolation, as if I were standing between two worlds that could never fully merge. Little did I know, this was just the prelude to the storm that would break on the drive home, exposing fractures that ran deeper than I imagined, and setting the stage for a revelation about my family's hidden strength. As we gathered our coats to leave, hugs were exchanged with the usual enthusiasm, tight embraces that left traces of flour on clothes and promises of future gatherings. Vanessa endured it with grace on the surface, but I caught her stepping back a fraction sooner than everyone else, her posture rigid. Driving away, the house lights fading in the rearview mirror, I glanced at her profile, illuminated by passing street lamps, and wondered if she felt the same warmth I did from the evening. The silence in the car was thick, pregnant with unspoken thoughts, and I braced myself for what might come next, unaware that her words would soon shatter the illusion of our shared future. The ride back was silent, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Vanessa stared out the window, her face a mask of cool detachment, while the hum of the car's engine filled the space between us. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale, replaying the evening in my mind, the way she'd recoiled from my family's warmth, her polite smiles that never reached her eyes. I sensed what was coming, like the crackle in the air before a storm breaks. When we pulled into our street, she finally turned to me, her voice sharp and final. "I can't do this, Alex," she said. "I can't be part of a family like yours. They're nice, I'm sure, but they're not like us." Those words hung between us, slicing through the haze of my hopes. I asked, "Can't do what?" though I already knew. Her tone turned tired, dismissive. "They're not the type of people we belong with." I thought of my dad, who once carried a child from a burning building and shrugged it off as just his job. My mom, who'd held the hands of the dying, offering comfort when words failed. Their lives, built on quiet heroism and unconditional love, were the home she'd just brushed off. I didn't feel anger, only a deep sadness for her. She was chasing a life of polished surfaces, blind to the treasure of genuine connection that had welcomed her with open arms and hot lasagna. I stayed quiet, not because I couldn't defend my family, but because her judgment didn't matter. It was a verdict on her, not them. In the driveway, I shut off the car and looked at her. "I understand," I said, my voice calm, though my chest ached. I understood she could never be one of us, not because of money or status, but because she lacked kindness, the one thing that mattered most. That moment clarified everything. Our values were worlds apart, and I didn't want the life she pictured. Her words echoed in my head as I lay awake that night, the moonlight casting shadows across the ceiling. Vanessa slept soundly beside me, unaware of the rift she'd exposed. I thought about the years we'd spent together, how I'd once been dazzled by her ambition, her curated life. She'd talk about our future, penthouse apartments, exclusive events, connections with important people, and I'd nod, thinking her drive could coexist with my roots. Now, I saw she viewed my background as a fixer-upper, something to renovate into her vision of success. The party had stripped away that illusion. I remembered my cousin Jake, who'd spent the evening regaling everyone with stories of his auto shop's latest triumph, a restored vintage Mustang. Vanessa had smiled thinly, her attention drifting to her phone. My Aunt Clara, with her flour-dusted apron, had tried to teach her a card game trick, only to be met with a polite but distant nod. Each moment was a thread, unraveling the fabric of our relationship. I pictured my parents' house, its worn wooden floors and shelves lined with photos of family milestones, graduations, weddings, my dad's old fire helmet gleaming in the corner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was home, a place where love was the currency, not status. Vanessa's world was different, shiny, calculated, like a perfectly staged photo. I'd once thought I could bridge those worlds, but her words in the car had burned that bridge to ash. I felt the weight of her judgment, not just on my family but on me, as if I were an accessory she'd outgrown. The realization stung, but it also freed me. I didn't need to prove my family's worth. Their value was in their laughter, their resilience, their open hearts. As dawn crept through the blinds, I knew what had to happen. This wasn't about a single night or a single sentence. It was about who we were at our core. Vanessa wanted a life that gleamed from the outside, but I wanted one that felt real from within. I thought of my grandfather, who'd built a fortune from nothing but lived modestly, teaching my parents that unearned wealth could be a burden. They'd chosen simplicity, never touching the trust fund that sat quietly in the background, a secret Vanessa didn't even suspect. I wondered what she'd think if she knew, but that thought faded quickly. Her values weren't about truth, they were about appearances, and I was done trying to fit into that frame. The next morning loomed like a deadline. I could already picture the kitchen, the smell of coffee, the ring she'd left on the counter last night after we got home. I didn't want a fight or a scene. I just wanted clarity. Her words had shown me we were building on sand, and no amount of effort could shore it up. As I drifted towards sleep, the ache in my chest softened into resolve. I wasn't losing her. I was finding myself. The party, the car ride, her cutting sentence, they weren't the end, but the beginning of something truer. I just didn't know yet how much truer it would get, or how the quiet strength of my family would reshape my future in ways Vanessa could never imagine. The morning after the party, I woke to sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, the smell of brewing coffee sharp in the air. My mind was clearer than it had been in months, as if Vanessa's words had burned away a fog I hadn't realized was there. The illusion of our relationship was gone, leaving only the sharp truth of who we were. I stood by the counter, watching the coffee drip, and felt a strange calm, no anger, just certainty. Vanessa shuffled in, her hair slightly messy, her eyes wary, like she expected a fight. She wasn't ready for my steadiness. "Morning," I said, sliding a mug toward her. "Vanessa, I've been thinking about what you said last night. You were right. We want different things, different people to build our lives with. This won't work." I picked up the engagement ring she'd left on the counter, its diamond catching the light, and held it out to her. It felt like a prop from a play that had already closed. She stared, her mouth parting in shock. "You're ending this because I was honest?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "No," I said simply. "I'm ending this because your honesty showed me we're not a match. What you value feels empty to me, and what I care about, you don't even see. That's not fixable." She tried to backtrack, her words tumbling out in a rush. She said I'd misunderstood, that she could learn to appreciate my family, that she'd been tired and didn't mean it. But her voice had the hollow ring of someone trying to rewrite a script after the audience had left. You can't unsay a bullet like that. Once it's fired, it's gone. I stayed calm, my resolve like steel. "I'll help you pack," I told her. "If you need movers, I can arrange that." She stood frozen, clutching the coffee mug, her eyes searching mine for a crack in my decision. There wasn't one. By evening, she seemed to accept it was over. She made a few tearful calls, and her sister agreed to help her move out the next day. Our 4-year relationship didn't end with shouting or drama, but with the quiet efficiency of closing a book you've already finished. The days that followed felt like waking from a long, disorienting dream. I moved through our apartment, now half empty with her things gone, and noticed how much I'd adjusted for her. The sleek furniture she'd picked, the art prints I didn't love but agreed to, the way I'd stopped inviting certain friends over because she found them unambitious. I'd tucked away pieces of myself to fit her vision, and now, with her gone, I could breathe again. I called my parents that first week, not to vent, but to hear their voices. Mom's warm laugh over the phone, Dad's gruff advice about fixing a leaky faucet, it grounded me. I spent a Saturday at their house, helping Dad polish his old fire helmets, the metal cool under my fingers. We didn't talk about Vanessa, but I felt their quiet support, like a hand on my shoulder. I started reaching out to old friends, the ones Vanessa had subtly nudged out of our circle. There was Mike, who ran a community gym and always had a story about some kid he'd coached into confidence. Or Sarah, a librarian who'd once dragged me to a book club where we argued about sci-fi novels until midnight. These were people Vanessa had dismissed as not going anywhere, but their laughter and easy company felt like coming home. One night, over beers at Mike's place, he clapped me on the back and said, "You seem lighter, man. Like to hear you again." He was right. I was shedding the weight of trying to be someone I wasn't. The breakup wasn't just about losing Vanessa. It was about reclaiming Alex. I thought about my family's values, the ones I'd always carried but let blur in her shadow. My dad's stories of running into fires weren't about glory, they were about duty. My mom's decades in the ER weren't for accolades, but for the people she helped. That was the legacy I wanted. Not Vanessa's world of polished connections and empty status. I didn't know what came next, but I knew it would be real. What I couldn't have guessed was how soon that reality would take shape, or how it would tie back to a quiet fortune my family had kept hidden. A fortune Vanessa never suspected, one that would later make her regret her choice more than I ever could have imagined. For now, though, it was enough to feel my feet on solid ground again, to know I'd chosen myself over a life that never fit. The weeks after Vanessa left felt like stepping out of a shadowed room into sunlight. I moved through my days with a lightness I hadn't realized I'd lost, as if I'd been carrying her expectations like a backpack full of stones. The apartment, now stripped of her sleek decor, felt more like mine, cluttered with old books and a worn-out couch I'd always liked. I spent more time at my parents' house, not out of obligation, but because it felt like home again. The smell of Mom's coffee brewing, the creak of Dad's chair as he read the paper. It was a reminder of who I was before I tried to fit into Vanessa's polished world. I wasn't running from the breakup. I was running toward myself, piecing together the parts I'd tucked away to make her comfortable. My family didn't pry about the split, but their quiet presence, Dad's nod as we fixed a fence post, Mom's hug that smelled faintly of antiseptic, was a steady anchor. I was rediscovering my roots, and with them, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I started calling up friends I'd let drift away. There was Tom, who ran a small bakery and always had flour on his jeans, and Lisa, a high school teacher who'd once convinced me to chaperone a field trip to a history museum. Vanessa had brushed them off as nice but not our kind, but reconnecting with them felt like slipping into a favorite jacket. One evening, over pizza at Tom's place, we laughed about old college pranks, and I realized how much I'd missed this. Easy, unpretentious company. Lisa teased me about my fancy ex and asked if I was okay. I nodded, surprised at how true it felt. "I'm better than okay," I said, and meant it. These were my people, the ones who didn't measure worth by job titles or social circles. Spending time with my family became a ritual again. One Sunday, I helped my cousins at their auto shop, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and metal. We worked on a beat-up truck, swapping stories about Dad's old firefighting days and Uncle Mike's legendary barbecue disasters. My cousin Jake, wiping grease from his hands, grinned and said, "Good to have you back, Alex. You were starting to act like one of those city types." I laughed, but his words hit home. I'd been drifting, trying to be someone Vanessa could approve of, but here, surrounded by tools and laughter, I felt grounded. My family's strength wasn't in what they owned, but in how they lived. Honestly, loudly, with hearts wide open. I thought a lot about Vanessa's words that night in the car, how she'd dismissed my family as not like us. The more I reflected, the more I saw how she'd misjudged them. My dad, who'd saved lives without ever seeking praise, didn't fit her idea of success. My mom, who'd spent decades stitching wounds and soothing fears, wasn't impressive enough for her curated world. I remembered a story Mom told once about a night in the ER when she held a scared teenager's hand through a surgery, staying hours past her shift. Vanessa would have seen that as ordinary, but to me it was extraordinary. That was the legacy I wanted to carry, not a life of chasing empty status. One crisp afternoon, I walked through my old neighborhood, the streets lined with modest houses and kids playing in driveways. I passed the fire station where Dad used to work, its red trucks gleaming in the sun. A retired colleague of his waved me over, sharing a quick story about Dad pulling a coworker from a collapsing roof. "Your old man's a hero," he said, clapping my shoulder. I nodded, a lump in my throat. Vanessa had never asked about those stories, never cared to know the depth behind my family's simplicity. I realized I didn't resent her for it, just pitied her. She'd walked away from something real, and I was starting to see how much that cost her, even if she didn't yet. As winter settled in, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just healing, I was growing. I started volunteering at the community center where my sister worked, helping kids with homework or tossing a football in the yard. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right, like I was honoring the values I'd nearly lost. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was open to it. Somewhere out there, I sensed a future that would match the person I was becoming. A future that, unbeknownst to me, was already taking shape in the form of a college friend I'd soon reconnect with, someone who'd see my world for the treasure it was. The air was sharp with the scent of autumn leaves when I bumped into Laura at a local coffee shop, her hair tied back and a smudge of dirt on her sleeve from a morning spent gardening. We hadn't seen each other since college, but her warm smile and easy laugh pulled me right back to late-night study sessions and debates over bad sci-fi movies. Laura was a veterinarian now, her life filled with animals and early mornings, and she carried herself with a grounded confidence that felt like a breath of fresh air after Vanessa's polished veneer. We grabbed coffee, then dinner, and soon our conversations stretched into hours, drifting from her work saving stray dogs to my dad's old firefighting stories. Being with her was effortless, no masks, no pretense, just the kind of connection that felt like slipping into a well-worn pair of boots. I hadn't realized how much I'd been craving that until I found it again. With every meeting, I felt a spark. Not just of attraction, but of recognition. She saw the world the way I did, with heart and honesty at its core. I was nervous about bringing Laura to meet my family, not because I doubted her, but because Vanessa's rejection still lingered like a bruise. I invited her to a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the same cozy place where Vanessa had faltered. The moment Laura stepped through the door, carrying a homemade apple tart, the air felt different. She laughed at my dad's terrible puns, her eyes crinkling with genuine amusement. When Mom pulled her into the kitchen to help with dishes, they ended up talking for an hour, their voices mingling with the clatter of plates. Laura joined my cousin's card game, tossing out playful jabs and losing spectacularly without a hint of self-consciousness. She didn't just fit. She belonged, her warmth blending into the chaos of my family, like it had always been there. Watching her, I felt a weight lift. Laura didn't see my family's simplicity as something to fix. She saw it as a strength. When my uncle told a story about his plumbing business, she leaned in, asking questions with real curiosity. When my aunt hugged her, leaving a trace of flour on her sweater, Laura just grinned and brushed it off. She wasn't performing, she was present. Later, as we sat on the porch, the evening air cool and the sound of crickets rising, she turned to me and said, "Your family's amazing, Alex. They're so real." Her words hit me hard. Not because they were surprising, but because they echoed what I'd always known, but let Vanessa's judgment cloud. Laura saw the value in the laughter, the stories, the love that filled that house, and in that moment, I knew she was different. Our relationship grew steadily, rooted in shared moments that felt like building blocks for something lasting. We'd spend weekends hiking local trails, her dog bounding ahead, or cooking dinners in my now cozy apartment, the air filled with the scent of garlic and her easy laughter. One night, as we sat on my couch with mugs of tea, she told me about a puppy she'd saved at work. A scrappy little thing, no one wanted. Sometimes the ones nobody sees are the ones worth fighting for, she said, her eyes soft. I thought of my family, how Vanessa had overlooked their worth, and felt a surge of certainty about Laura. She wasn't just kind, she was the kind of person who saw beauty in the overlooked, who valued heart over flash. I started to share more about my family's history, not the wealth but the stories. Dad's firefighting scars, Mom's late-night shifts, the way they'd built a life on principle. Laura listened, her hand resting on mine, and I felt safe opening up in a way I never had with Vanessa. I didn't mention the trust fund, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't define us. My parents had taught me that money unearned could weigh you down, and Laura seemed to understand that without needing to be told. We talked about our futures, not in terms of status, but in moments. Quiet mornings, family dinners, maybe a house with a yard for her dogs. By the time winter rolled around, I knew I wanted Laura in my life for good. It wasn't a grand epiphany, but a quiet certainty, like the way you know a song by heart. I started thinking about proposing, not with a flashy ring, but with a promise that matched who we were. I could already picture her at my parents' table, laughing with my cousins, her tart next to Mom's lasagna. What I didn't know yet was how soon that future would take shape, or how my family would embrace her in a way that would make Vanessa's rejection feel like a distant memory. A misstep that led me to exactly where I was meant to be. Laura's laugh mingled with the clatter of dishes in my parents' kitchen, a sound that felt like home in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It was spring now, and we'd been dating for months, our connection growing stronger with every shared moment, late-night talks over pizza, walks with her scruffy rescue dog, stories swapped about our lives. I'd proposed on a quiet hiking trail, the ring simple but meaningful, and she'd said yes with tears in her eyes and a grin that lit up the forest. We didn't want a big wedding. Neither of us cared for showy gestures. So 6 months after reconnecting, we flew to the coast with just my parents and brother, exchanging vows on a cliff at sunset. The ocean stretched endless below, the air salty and cool, and as Laura's hand fit into mine, I felt a certainty that anchored me deeper than anything I'd known with Vanessa. This wasn't about appearances, it was about a promise, a life built on shared values. When we kissed, the wind tugging at her dress, my parents' quiet applause felt like the world's approval. Back home, Laura settled into my family's rhythm like she'd always been there. Sunday dinners became our ritual. Her homemade pie is now a staple beside Mom's lasagna. She'd tease Dad about his fire helmets, asking for stories he rarely told, and he'd light up, his gruff voice softening. My cousins roped her into their card games, and she'd throw back quips, her laughter loud and unselfconscious. One evening, as she helped Mom chop vegetables, their chatter about ER shifts and animal surgeries flowed so naturally I just stood in the doorway, watching, my chest tight with gratitude. Laura didn't just tolerate my family, she loved them, saw their heart the way I did. It was a stark contrast to Vanessa's strained politeness, her nose curling at their warmth. One night, after a particularly rowdy family barbecue, we sat on my parents' porch, the air thick with the scent of grilled meat and blooming lilacs. Laura leaned against me, her fingers laced with mine, and said, "I've never felt so at home anywhere." Her words hit me like a warm wave, washing away the last traces of Vanessa's rejection. I told her about my grandfather, how he'd built a fortune through careful investments, but lived simply, teaching my parents that true wealth was in character, not cash. Laura nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That's why they're so grounded," she said. "They know what matters." I didn't mention the trust fund itself, it didn't seem relevant. Our life was full without it, built on moments like these, surrounded by family and the smell of summer. A few weeks later, my parents asked us over for a quiet dinner. Just the four of us. The table was set with Mom's good plates, a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket, a rare sight in their modest home. After we ate, Dad cleared his throat, his usual reserve replaced by a solemn warmth. "Alex, Laura," he said, "we've been talking since your wedding. We saw how things were with Vanessa, how she judged us, tried to change you. We stayed quiet because it was your life, but it hurt." He turned to Laura, his eyes soft. "Then you came along. You saw us for who we are, brought light to this house." Mom slid a thick envelope across the table, her hands trembling slightly. "We met with our lawyer," she said. "The trust, the one your grandfather built, we've changed it." Dad explained that the trust, a fortune my grandfather had left, had grown over decades but never been touched. They'd lived simply, believing unearned money could be a burden. Now they'd rewritten the will to name Laura a primary beneficiary, not through me, but in her own right, a gesture of trust and belonging. I felt my throat tighten, not because of the money but because of what it meant. They saw Laura as family, as someone who understood their values. She reached for my hand under the table, her eyes glistening. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Mom smiled, patting her arm. "You don't have to say anything. You're one of us." As we drove home, the envelope tucked in my bag, I felt a quiet triumph. Not over Vanessa, but for us, for Laura, for my family, for the life we were building. I didn't know then that word of the trust would soon reach Vanessa, stirring a storm I hadn't anticipated. For now, it was enough to feel Laura's hand in mine, to know we'd found something real, something Vanessa could never have understood. The summer air was warm, carrying the scent of cut grass, as Laura and I settled into our life together. Our small apartment filled with her plants and my old records. We'd been married a few months, and the rhythm of our days, her early shifts at the vet clinic, my evenings tinkering with projects in the garage, felt like a song we'd written together. My family's acceptance of Laura had deepened our bond, their Sunday dinners now a tapestry of her stories woven into theirs. But beneath the surface of our quiet happiness, I sensed a ripple from the past, like a stone about to break the water's calm. The trust fund, that hidden fortune my parents had revealed to Laura, was a secret kept from most. But secrets have a way of slipping out. I didn't expect it to happen so soon, or that it would come with Vanessa's shadow trailing behind. It started with a call from my cousin Jake, his voice a mix of amusement and disbelief. He'd been at the dinner when my parents shared the news about the trust, and though he'd kept it quiet, a friend in finance had overheard a snippet at a family gathering. Word had spread, as it does in small circles, and it reached Vanessa's crowd. Jake said she'd called him, fishing for details, her tone sharp with something like panic. "She thought we were just a bunch of loud nobodies," he said, chuckling. "Now she's hearing about millions and losing her mind." I didn't laugh. I felt a pang of pity for her, chasing a life of appearances only to find she'd misjudged the one thing that could have changed her game. The trust, built by my grandfather's discipline, was never about flash, it was about legacy, something Vanessa couldn't grasp. A week later, the email came. I was at the kitchen table, Laura grading vet reports beside me, when I saw Vanessa's name in my inbox. The subject was blank, but the message was a storm of words, bitter, stinging, raw. "Congrats on your quick wedding," she wrote. "I guess you found someone who fits your charming little family. Enjoy your basic life." The sarcasm dripped through the screen, but beneath it was something else, regret, sharp and desperate. She didn't mention the trust directly, but I could feel it in her tone, the way she lingered on basic, as if she'd learned something that turned her world upside down. Laura read it over my shoulder, her brow furrowing. She gave a small, sad smile and said, "She really has no idea, does she?" I shook my head. "No, she doesn't." We didn't dwell on it. We had our life, and Vanessa's anger was a distant echo. But the ripple grew. My cousin's friend, the one who'd spilled the news, called me a few days later, half laughing, half shocked. Vanessa had been at a party, her usual crowd of polished professionals around her, when someone mentioned my family's wealth. She'd frozen, he said, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. She hadn't cried. She'd raged, her voice cutting through the room as she insisted it couldn't be true, that I'd hidden it from her, that my simple family couldn't possibly have that kind of money. Her whole worldview, built on judging people by their surface, had cracked. She'd bet on the wrong hand, walked away from a family richer in heart and, as it turned out, in wealth, because it didn't shine the way she wanted. I didn't respond to her email. There was no point. Her anger wasn't about me, it was about her own choices, her failure to see what mattered. I tucked the message away, forwarding it to my lawyer, just in case her desperation turned messy. Laura and I talked about it once, late at night, the hum of crickets outside our window. "It's sad," she said, her voice soft. She thought she was above it all, but she missed everything. I nodded, thinking of my parents, their modest house, their quiet pride. The trust was theirs to give, and they'd chosen Laura, not because of money, but because she embodied the values they'd lived by: kindness, authenticity, love. As the days passed, I felt the weight of Vanessa's reaction fade. My life with Laura was full. Her laughter in the morning, our plans for a small house with a yard, the way she'd slip her hand into mine during family dinners. The trust sat untouched, a monument to my grandfather's discipline, but it wasn't what defined us. What mattered was the life we were building, the moments that felt real. I knew Vanessa's story wasn't over, that her regret would burn hotter when the full truth settled in, but that was her burden, not mine. For me, the path was clear, and it led to a future where love and legacy trumped everything else. Vanessa's final email arrived like a late storm, wild and unmoored, 2 months after the whispers about my family's wealth had reached her. I was in our living room, Laura curled up beside me with a book, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows on the walls. The message was a torrent, pages of accusations, her words jagged with fury. She called me a liar, said I'd tricked her by hiding the trust fund, as if I'd owed her a glimpse into something my family had kept private for decades. "You let me walk away from a fortune," she wrote, her tone a mix of rage and desperation, "and now you're playing happy family with some nobody?" I read it once, my jaw tight, then passed the laptop to Laura. She scanned it, her eyes narrowing, and let out a quiet sigh. "She's not mad at you," she said, setting the laptop aside. "She's mad at herself." I nodded, deleting the email after forwarding it to my lawyer. It was messy, the kind of rant born from realizing a mistake too big to undo, but it didn't shake me. My life with Laura was steady, built on something Vanessa could never understand: heart, not headlines. The news had spread through our old college circles, growing a little larger with each telling. A friend called, his voice tinged with amusement, saying Vanessa had exploded at a dinner party, railing about how she'd misjudged my poor family. She'd spent years chasing status, curating a life that looked perfect online, only to learn the people she'd dismissed were sitting on wealth that outshone her carefully chosen connections. Her reaction wasn't about losing me. It was about losing a game she'd thought she'd mastered. She'd walked away from a family rich in love and, as it turned out, money, because it didn't gleam the way she wanted. My cousin Jake, who'd never liked her, grinned when he heard. "She thought she was trading up," he said over beers one night. Turns out she folded a winning hand. I didn't gloat. I felt a quiet pity for her, trapped in a worldview that valued polish over substance. Laura and I moved forward, our days filled with small, real moments. Her coming home with stories of a rescued kitten, me fixing shelves in our apartment, the smell of her coffee brewing each morning. My parents adored her, inviting us over for dinners, where her pies sat proudly beside Mom's lasagna. The trust fund, that silent monument to my grandfather's discipline, remained untouched. We didn't need it. Our wealth was in the laughter around the table, the way Laura fit into my family's chaos like she'd been born to it. My parents often said she'd brought light back to their home, a warmth Vanessa had never understood. I thought of my dad's fire helmets, polished with care, and Mom's stories of late-night ER shifts. That was the legacy I wanted, the one Laura embraced without hesitation. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering what Vanessa was doing, whether she'd found the right people she'd always chased. But those thoughts faded quickly, like smoke in the wind. My life was here, with Laura's hand in mine, her laughter filling our home. The trust was a gift, not just of money, but of trust in us, in the life we were building. My parents had seen it in Laura, the kindness, the authenticity, and made her part of their legacy. That was worth more than any fortune. As autumn settled in, the air crisp and the leaves turning gold, I felt a deep contentment. Laura and I walked through our neighborhood, her dog bounding ahead, and talked about the future. A house with a garden, maybe kids someday, more Sundays with my family's noise and love. Vanessa's regret was her own, a debt she'd carry for misjudging what mattered. I didn't need to answer her email or prove anything. My life was proof enough. The days grew shorter, the evenings cooler, and our small apartment felt warmer for it. Laura would hum softly, tending her plants, while I'd sit nearby, sketching plans for a workbench, or just watching her move through our space. My parents called often, their voices lighter now, as if Laura's presence had lifted a weight they hadn't named. They'd chosen simplicity over wealth, heart over show, and Laura fit that choice perfectly. The trust fund sat quietly, a promise for the future, but what mattered was the present. The way Laura's eyes lit up at my dad's bad jokes, the way Mom hugged her like a daughter. Vanessa had lost more than money. She'd lost a family, a life that could have been hers if she'd seen past the surface. I didn't dwell on her mistake. I was too busy living the life she'd never understand, one where love was the currency, and I was richer than she'd ever known. The leaves are falling now, drifting softly to the ground outside our window, and I sit with Laura, her warmth beside me, as we plan a quiet weekend with my parents. The storm of Vanessa's words feels distant, like a dream fading in the morning light. I think of my family's house, its worn floors and crowded table, where laughter spills over like wine, where Laura's pies sit beside Mom's lasagna, where Dad's stories unfold with a gruff pride. They gave us more than a trust fund. They gave us a legacy of heart, one Laura carries as naturally as breathing. She moves through our life with an ease I cherish. Her hands in the dirt of her garden, her voice soft as she talks to her dogs, her eyes bright with love for the people I hold dear. Vanessa's rage, her realization of what she lost, is a shadow that doesn't touch us. She chased a life that glittered, blind to the gold in simplicity, in kindness, in us. I don't wish her ill, I just wish her peace, the kind I've found in Laura's laugh, in my family's embrace. As the evenings grow long and the fire crackles in my parents' hearth, I know this is where I belong. The trust waits untouched, a quiet promise, but our wealth is here. In the love we share, the life we build, the truth we live. And as I hold Laura's hand, the world softens, and I know we've found something eternal, something that whispers forever in the warmth of home.